Hello, partners. On this episode, Richard Goerling from Mindful Badges here. We're going to challenge some of your preconceived notions about meditation and mindfulness and the things that it is and what it isn't and how it's going to make you a better tactical athlete and warrior.
You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
So 133. I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
42, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy, running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
I believe we have shots fired.
Give me back up now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down. Suspect is down.
This is the Squad Room.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Tesla. I'm an active duty sergeant for a sheriff's office in Southern California. And on this show, we try to tease out knowledge, skills, abilities, things we can learn from subject matter experts, from other cops, from people who have something to say, who can maybe improve our lives in one way or another, with the goal of being better first responders, better officers, better husbands and wives, better sons and brothers and daughters and sisters. And how can we bring these things into our lives? And we do this through the lens of our badges, not just the badge that we hold on our chest and that we've sworn an oath to uphold, but the badges in our life, our beliefs, actions, discipline, goals, emotions, and service. And today, my guest is a repeat guest, a fantastic guest, to talk about these badges. And one of the very first critical things we have to do to get better, to become better, and to move forward. And that is how to develop self-awareness and how to develop a practice of mindfulness. Now, you will probably have your preconceived notions about mindfulness. And I should title this episode Tactical Mindfulness for the Tactical Warrior or something like that. Just to convince you that it's not a woo-woo, hippy-dippy kind of idea. Awareness comes in many forms, and Richard, our guest, is going to explain many of those things. But it's one of the most paramount changes that I've made in my life is focusing on my own self-awareness and on how to be aware of my place in the world and holding that space. And it is one of the hardest things to do as well. It's easy to start a physical regimen or a nutrition plan. Those things are in front of you. Those things are things you can see. There are known metrics that you can follow to achieve success or to identify if you've succeeded or failed. And mindfulness, unfortunately, is not like that at all. Mindfulness is a practice. There's no such thing as perfection in this. And it is a moving target. And it's a challenge. But it will absolutely make you a better cop. It will absolutely make you more empathetic and compassionate and sympathetic with your spouse. It will absolutely reduce your anger. It will help you, it will reveal things to you. It will reveal truths to you that you knew were there, but you weren't sure how to deal with. That might be a woo answer right there. But the point is I've explored the mindfulness and self-awareness stuff quite a bit. That's probably been the biggest thing I've taken away from my guests, more than the physical fitness stuff and the nutrition. It's the mindfulness and self-awareness stuff. And I'm not perfect with my meditation practice, but I am definitely improving and instituting a self-awareness practice that I am really happy with. So my guest today is Dr. Richard, not doctor, Lieutenant, should be a doctor. He will be soon, I imagine. But he is a teacher at the college level. Anyway, Lieutenant Richard Goerling, now retired Lieutenant Richard Goerling, just about a week ago. He runs Mindful Badge, and he has been on the national news, and NBC came out and did a thing with him in LAPD, where he teaches officers how to tap into some of that self-awareness to become less stressed out, how to reduce cortisol, and how to use those things in everything else we do in our lives. We have a great conversation here where he talks about mindfulness as being part of his belief that it's human performance optimization, and that every interaction we have with another human is part of our performance, and not from a theatrical sense, like you're acting, but from are you able to perform the tasks and duties of being a human? It's a really interesting idea. He talks about the 4 interventions that are important to him and that he thinks every law enforcement officer should have in dealing with trauma. And he's got an opinion about trauma that I think needs to be heard more and more, and our not only our interaction with it, but our beliefs about it. We talk about vulnerability and being vulnerable and your fixed and growth mindset, and the difference between compassion and empathy, and how to cultivate self-awareness, and all sorts. It was a great conversation. I could have talked for 3 hours with him, but we had to cut it off because he's a busy guy. So check him out check him out at Mindful Badge, and take a listen to this, and let him know, and let me know either in the comments or on the show notes or on socials. You can hit me at the Squad Room or on our Facebook group if you've got a self-awareness or meditation or mindfulness practice and what it means to you and what it is. All right, so here we are with Richard Goerling. Richard Goerling of Mindful Badge, welcome back to the Squad Room.
Thank you, Garrett. Great to be here.
It's this revisit has been over 2 years in the making. The last time we actually got to sit down in person, which was a great experience for me. I really enjoyed our time together. You were here teaching another agency, not from my jurisdiction, but another agency that was in town for a full retreat with you. And I got the chance to jump in, pick you up at the airport, go to lunch, and then have a conversation before you went off and taught them. And, a lot has happened in the police profession in the last 2 years around mindfulness training. And it seems like it's really grown in acceptance around the country. And so the first question I wanted to ask was, is that true? Do you find that to be true? And what has your experience been in the last 2 years since we first spoke?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the time down in your part of the country last time we met. That was really good to visit in person. So I think, yes, the interest in mindfulness has certainly grown. It's an interesting sort of paradox, however. The interest in mindfulness is growing in part because so much of what we're trying to do in law enforcement isn't working. So much of the issues around health and well-being and sometimes performance, most of the time we're very myopic. We just consider this idea of officer wellness, which isn't going to work for us, and we can talk more about that. But the interest around mindfulness is really looking at how do we bring in training, how do we add one more thing to this plethora of a menu of training that we are offering law enforcement officers. So in one way, it's really good. In another way, we still struggle to step outside of this traditional paradigm of how we're looking at this issue. And this issue really is a bigger, broader thing beyond wellness. And I like to frame the conversation around human performance optimization. And we look at what does that mean? So what does human performance mean? Well, it means a lot of things, but let's first look at all the domains that we potentially have to consider. And certainly one is work. And there's multiple sort of subsets within work. It's the interpersonal skills of the people we work with. It's the actual tradecraft that we might have in various jobs within this discipline. And some of those are administrative, and most of those are out in the field. They're operational, they're tactical. But we also have just the performance domains of home, of family, performance domains of just community, and all the ways that those break down. If we're coaching basketball or little league or soccer, or we're going to our faith community, or we're just going to other sort of social tribes that we create, everywhere that we have an opportunity to show up with another human being is a performance domain. And I think we broaden our idea of what performance is all about. We really look at training skills ultimately in humanity, which is sort of a very broad concept. But mindfulness touches on these really fundamental skills of what it means to be a human and how to navigate the world through all of its complexities, through all of its challenges, and frankly, through its its stress and trauma, or maybe said differently, through its suffering. And so we aren't quite there yet in how our leadership paradigm of the policing institution here in America looks at mindfulness. But we're beginning to shift the conversation. We're beginning to make some course corrections on how we strategically vision out how to care for the men and women who daily lace up their boots, go out in the field, and do the very, very difficult work of policing in their communities.
That's it. I've never, and this is why I had you on, I've never thought of mindfulness as a performance aspect of my life. And I like how you said it, and I tried to write it down fast, but how every time we show up with another human being is an opportunity for a performance. Not a performance like acting, but you said it better than me, but, and I got to think about that for a second, because you're right. I mean, in our job, we're always out contacting people when we're doing pet stops or car stops or community interactions. But so we focus a lot on those things, but so much of our lives and so much of our stress and so much of the things that devolve are the things that are at home, and how we show up with our family, or how we show up with our friends, or frankly, how we end up not showing up for those people, right? And so to frame that as part of our human performance that's really interesting. So there's a lot of confusion these days around what actually mindfulness is. I mean, it's a buzzword by itself, and there's magazines and books and people are talking about it. It's a hashtag these days. But how do you, as a practitioner, and someone who teaches us, how do you define mindfulness?
Yeah, mindfulness, the term itself has really started to annoy me, but it's just a word, man. First of all, mindfulness is just a word, and it means all kinds of things in different places that you go. In context to policing, in context to these high reliability organizations, even beyond policing, mindfulness is a practice in the skills of paying attention, of discernment, of self-awareness and self-regulation. And, the way I would define mindfulness is that these skills produce the ability to take in information and use wisdom and discernment. It offers us what we might call response intelligence. So that's a kind of an interesting term that one of my co-trainers, Brian Shires, and I made up. But this idea of response intelligence is, I'm not reactive. I'm responding with intelligence, not the IQ kind of intelligence necessarily, but just in a smart, sound way, right? And then finally, it's about clarity of mind, clarity of being. And so this notion that what mindfulness is in the context to our warrior arena, it's discernment, response intelligence, and clarity. And so those are the components really that lead to this idea again of equanimity, of peak performance, of moving into flow states with the greatest possible skill.
Where are you finding the roadblocks to more acceptance? Is it still just this idea that it's a woo-woo kind of, for lack of a better term, hippie idealism? Is that where it is, or is it with chiefs and spending money, or with the line level guys who just want to paint it black and put Velcro on it, and some Molly, or where is that coming from?
Yeah. There's many sources of obstacles when it comes to looking at how to train the human being with mindfulness skills. And, the first and foremost, it's, there are cultural barriers, and it's not the cultural barriers that you might think. I think that, if I can spend time with the operators out in the field, I generally can convince your tactical operators, and I use that term broadly, so my apologies to our SWAT community. It's much more broader than that. It's all of us out in the field in uniform doing the enforcement work. With those men and women, I can spend some time with them. I can talk a little bit of science. I can maybe give them some experiential introduction to what it's like to breathe and pay attention to their thinking, and to normalize so much of what they're experiencing as a result of occupational stress and trauma. They're actually relatively, they're an easy sell. And they're an easy sell in large part because they're suffering, and very little of what we are offering them is working. And so what I often get is a really strong skeptical curiosity, which I think is a win. And I'd love to work with skeptical curiosity. The other cultural barriers are somewhat both cultural and organizational. So let's talk about senior leadership in law enforcement. They are simply ill-informed across the board. And I know those are fighting words, but in 15 years of being in this game, I think it's an absolutely fair observation. Increasingly, senior leaders are paying more attention to information that's available to them outside of their own institution. And they're going, oh, that's really interesting. And that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm increasingly working with those senior police leaders. Many other police leaders are very insular in where they get their information, their education. And if you stick with the standard sources of information from police leadership, you pretty much are going to get status quo. And what we know is status quo isn't working. So there's that leadership piece. And then the other organizational / cultural piece is we built an entire institution within the institution around critical incident stress management and peer support. And this is where a lot of your audience is probably going to get pissed at me. It is a model that isn't working. And instead of looking to transform this model and to sort of give it an upgrade, many of those folks in that community hold fast to the status quo and they don't want to release it. They're convinced that everybody needs critical incident stress debriefings. They're convinced that peer support is the right paradigm. And so they hold fast to those things. And then we continue doing the same kinds of psychoeducation, sometimes, I think frequently not very well. And we create a whole lot of drama around trauma. And frankly, these institutions are creating a victim mindset, a fixed mindset around trauma. And what I would offer, Garrett, is that I want the men and women in uniform to have a mindset that I experience trauma. I move through it skillfully. And with a period of recovery, I will come out stronger than when I started. The CISM model essentially says trauma happens to me and I need help. And again, I just opened up a huge arena for all kinds of fights and hate mail, and hopefully they'll direct those to me, not to you. But we really do need a makeover. We need to innovate. We need to really look at what is the science of medicine, the science of interpersonal neurobiology, and the science of human performance. How do those things today inform us on how we lead forward? And so, yes, there's some interest in mindfulness, but in some ways it's almost bringing it into models that don't work. And so I think we still need to hold mindfulness training in a space that is a little bit counterculture, not counterculture to the needs of the men and women, but counterculture to the organizational bureaucracy that's been born and cultivated over the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that you're kind of hitting on something I've discovered and I've found, and I think I've fallen victim to myself, that when a critical incident happens, there is a growing assumption that it will induce trauma, and that and I think it's actually a well-intentioned response by our agencies to serve us. But it seems like more and more as these things come into the department, and mine included, the assumption is that a trauma incident happens, therefore you must seek some sort of psychological help, or you will be damaged by the event. Not that you are resilient in advance of the event and you can move through it, but this event is going to damage you, it's going to traumatize you, and you are going to need help. When that's not necessarily the case. And we sometimes set our people up for this assumption that a shooting or a bad traffic accident or those sorts of things are going to cause trauma, or as I should say, trauma that we can't work through, versus building the resiliency in advance, which I think is a real part of the work you're doing, is what helps us move through those things. And I'm not sure if I'm completing the circle of thought for you here, but they want to help, but they're kind of over-parenting and helicopter parenting this style of police psychology or psychology trauma on us versus giving us the tools in advance. Is that making any sense to you?
It does make sense to me, and I think there's a lot to unpack with that, Garrett. And if I could First, a couple things to say. One is that even I'm critical of some of the things that we're doing as an institution. Yet there's no malicious actor here. Just to be very clear, It really, really, our police leaders and community leaders are very well intended.
Yeah,
and I think it's important to hold to that. There's no need to vilify anyone here.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to suggest that. It was all out of good intentions.
No, that was really trying to make sure people understand. They hear me say that because I know you're not saying that, but I don't want to be that that asshole that people are like, well, Anyway, you know how it goes.
I got you.
So, and I think this notion that you're talking about training before the trauma is critically important. And it's a all caps and. When we train men and women in policing, I think we need to be honest with them and we need to tell them the truth. And the truth is this: you will experience stress injury multiple times over the arc of your career. Mm-hmm. And there's another and you are a badass. And with appropriate interventions and recovery periods, you will come out stronger than when you started. The thing about that, though, is it requires a lot of work, right? Yeah. A lot of work on our part as individuals, and it requires a lot of work on our each other, for you and I to support each other. When I'm feeling trauma injured and I have some need for interventions, then you support me, right? And vice versa. And I think these interventions that we're talking about, to oversimplify, there's 4 things. And the first one is medical intervention. And, that's obviously seeing a medical doc, and ideally someone who's practicing integrated medicine to look at a lot of different things to treat your whole person. The second form of intervention that's critically important for us is psychological intervention. And one of the things that I say, and this is increasingly becoming accepted, which is a little surprising to me, is that I believe, this is the one area that I'm prescriptive for all first responders. I believe that you cannot navigate your career in optimum health and performance without having a mental health clinician that you see on a regular basis, not because you're broken, not because you're fucked up, but because it's smart. And the mental health clinician who's skilled, someone you have some synergy with, someone that really works for you to become your mental health coach, just like the CrossFit coach, just like the running coach, just like the strength coach, to keep your shit together. And that's critically important. So that medical intervention, the psychological intervention, and then there's the social intervention. And this is where our peer support community fills the void. And I would rather, instead of calling us peer support, I would rather use terms like embedded resilience team or peer resilience team, because who wants to go somewhere where it says support on the door? No, it's not about support because we're fucked up. It's about let's create more resilience. Let's create resilience coaches instead of peer support personnel. And let's really look at evidence-based coaching methods instead of let's wallow in the victimhood of being traumatized. And I'm not trying to minimize trauma injury. It's very real and it will happen to us, and it could be mild, it could be severe. So it really just depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
And so the fourth area is in, one that I mentioned, but I don't spend a lot of time talking about because it's outside of my wheelhouse, but it's spiritual intervention. So what does that mean? So I think, the more I learn about science, Garrett, the more I realize there's so much we don't know. There really is this like mystery. And sometimes I jokingly call it the pure fucking magic of the science. And there's so many things we don't know. We don't know why mindfulness works. Seriously, we don't know why. We don't know why we see structural changes in the brain from meditation on a regular basis. But damn if it doesn't really change people's lives, right? And so to hold on to a little bit of that mystery, that spiritual piece, maybe folks have a faith practice, they stay connected to, or they dabble in that here and there. But just to really ensure that we are holding our spiritual existence as human beings in some way is critically important too. So those 4 interventions over the arc of our career in varying intensities, in varying situations, medical intervention, psychological intervention, social intervention, or I like to call it tribal sometimes, and spiritual. Those are all areas we need to go to in our periods of recovery and also in just our periods of just sustaining our health and well-being.
I talk a lot about the need to have a team around you, and how it could be any one of these people or all 4 of these, but you need to have people around you who can support you like that, and how it really takes a team of people to put one cop out on the street. And you hit on something that I've been talking a lot about recently and sharing, was that in episode 100, I had one of my coaches on, a friend. His name's Trevor Bohm. And he was talking basically what you said about psychological intervention. He said he's worried about the people in our profession who don't have a consistent therapy practice. You know, you should be equipped with a gun, a badge, and a therapist when you go out on the street. And he's not worried about the people who are in therapy. He's worried about the ones who won't go, because they're the ones who he sees as struggling. And it was in that conversation I was sharing some of my own path with that stuff, and how in 2017 I finally went in and tried some cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR and some other things after some symptomology came up, largely based on our talk and some other talks that I've had, where I was like, okay, that's not appropriate, or that's not the right response to this situation. I need to kind of dig into that. And it's something where even I didn't want to talk about terribly openly. Even though I have this podcast and I talk about these things and the importance of doing them, I wasn't sharing that myself very openly until this experience. And I'm now on that same page with you of the need for preemptive cognitive help, cognitive therapy, whatever style of psychotherapy you want to choose and which you find valuable. It is as much part of our preparation to go out on the street as it is our physical exercise and our eating right and our firearms training and all those things. It has to be that important, I think.
I would agree, and I just want to acknowledge episode 100. First of all, for episode 100, that's just fucking fantastic.
Oh, thanks, man.
And really, Garrett, the courage and the strength that you demonstrated just doing that episode is exactly the kind of warrior strength that we need to see in each other, and that exists, but that our institution and culture doesn't offer us a space to bring that to the tribal encounter. And so thank you for doing that episode. Thank you for being that incredibly courageous. And I've been thinking about this term vulnerability, and one of the things that your episode really got me thinking, because we speak to vulnerability when we train in mindfulness. In large part, it is a cultural fallacy. So if we think of vulnerability, it's like, oh, I'm going to be vulnerable. Well, okay, what I'm really saying is I'm going to be courageous. And if I could offer your listeners anything that might be helpful, is that when the term vulnerable comes up in context to themselves, if they could replace that word with courage or courageous or some derivative of courage, because that's really what we're talking about. This idea of, oh, I'm vulnerable because I'm here talking to you, is a cultural construct that just feeds negative thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
so,
kind of a victim.
So really what I'm doing by being vulnerable is I'm actually being strong. Mm-hmm. I'm demonstrating, hey, I am a human being, and this is the condition of the human experience. And if we can stop this bullshit pretending that this is not part of the condition of the human experience, then we can have greater authenticity. And so really, when we talk about vulnerability, what we really mean is courageous authenticity. And we need to remove that term that starts with a V from our vocabulary.
That's a great point. And it is courageous. It took a lot of courage to do that, or for anybody to come forward and talk about those kinds of things. And, I like that. I'm going to start replacing that word, because vulnerability does sound often, awfully close to victim,
well, and I think that's, in context to mindset, this is one of my greatest hangups with our critical incident stress management / peer support community. It's not the people, it's not the intention, it's not some of the really good work they're actually doing. It's the fixed mindset. And we could kind of go, we could, run up the highway from where you are, and we could go to Stanford and visit with Dr. Carol Dweck, who's done research on mindset and wrote a book called Mindset.
Great book.
Right? Exactly. But this is what we're talking about. And so what we're trying to do is, how do we translate Carol's work into practical, tactical skills and ways of thinking and being? And one of those ways is to jettison some of the terms in the context that we're using them, and also to have a growth mindset around trauma. And I love to go to trainings, and I love to ask the question, hey, how many of y'all heard about post-traumatic stress disorder? And of course, everyone raises their hand except for 3 people who just don't want to participate, right? And I love those folks. And then I ask, how many of you have heard about this idea of post-traumatic growth? And maybe 4 or 5 people raise their hand. And so what that continues to reinforce for me is that we continue talking about PTSD instead of, let's talk about post-traumatic stress. Let's even replace PTS with stress injury and trauma injury.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get rid of these acronyms that foster negative context and fixed mindset. And let's really talk about the reality of what we know about occupational stress injury and the reality that likely we are all going to be impacted by it. Probably multiple times throughout our career, and it's okay because we're a badass, because we have the strengths of humanity, because we're connected to our people, and we are wise enough to seek the kinds of interventions that we need. And where mindfulness fits into this, it cultivates a sense of self-awareness around how we think about things, literally how we think, what we think, when we think, and how regulated that thinking is. And it cultivates a connectivity to our feeling states, which are including emotions, but also other states that are not emotions, things like ego. How does my ego emerge? And just awareness of that, and be able to work with those things. It cultivates the awareness of our own biases that emerge just naturally as a human being, and allows us an opportunity to work with that, right? And it cultivates this ability to connect with the physical body, the sensing physical body, to reconnect with that. And those 3 arenas are not 3 separate arenas. They're all intimately connected. And if we can learn to cultivate awareness, bring in some compassion, because that's clearly important. I'd love to talk about what I mean by that, and to really synchronize this remarkable human machine in those 3 arenas, our thinking mind, our feeling states, and our physical body, we will be more capable of making more informed decisions. Notice I didn't say better, but more informed decisions about how we seek periods of recovery and intervention.
So, yeah, more informed. You just have more information. I'm just thinking that through, but it's not. But you may come to the same conclusion, but you have more information on why you did that. Is that kind of what you said?
Well, exactly. And, and maybe noticing how you feel. Let's talk about burnout. Let's talk about this idea of burnout. And so burnout often manifests, we wake in the morning and we just feel melancholy, right? We feel melancholy. That's the scientific word for shitty, in case anyone's wondering. And so you wake up kind of feeling melancholy and you're like, oh, that's interesting, And so what a mindfulness practice can allow us to do is to observe that melancholy with curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, in my mind, I might say to myself, oh, it's curious or it's interesting that I'm feeling melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
And I might evaluate that. I might spend some time thinking about that. I might not. I might just say, okay, check, noted. And then the next thing is, what do I want to do about that? And maybe nothing. Maybe it's like, oh, I'm just going to move through my day. It's cool. It's just one of those days. I know how to do this. And maybe on the 7th or 8th day, waking up feeling melancholy, maybe now it's like, oh, this is interesting. This is day 7. Doesn't seem to be changing much. Almost kind of feels a little deeper melancholy. What do I want to do here? What intervention might I want to seek? And so now maybe I'm going to go to my medical doctor. Hey, doc, check me out here, run some tests. What's my blood work look like? How's everything going in my body? Is this disease of the body, or is this some kind of illness? Is it stress injury of the mind and heart and body? And then so we can start there. Maybe I'm just going to go straight to my mental health clinician, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or some other wise choice, more informed decision about how to care for myself, rather than falling into this habituated, maladaptive, unconscious response of just being in melancholy, and everything around me suffers because I'm suffering.
Mm-hmm. Which is what we, I think, as an industry, really gravitate towards. We are so in that hypervigilant state constantly that it requires. To me, it seems that in a profession like ours, the effort required to remain mindful and then be proactive about it is exponential versus someone who is not in a high stress position, right? Because not only are we struggling with the stress of the shift and the organizational issues and the bad sleep because we're on night shift, et cetera, et cetera. We then have to come up with the extra cognitive energy and the extra enthusiasm to do something about that melancholy. And I think as a result, that's why we seem to struggle so much more than so much of the general population. Would you agree or disagree with that, you think?
I think that's absolutely right. And data from John Violante out of Buffalo, New York, and his work has suggested, or I shouldn't say suggested, has demonstrated that police officers suffer twice the rates of clinical depression as the general population. And, you might not think that's a big deal, but really when you dive into that data, the general population clinical depression rates are out of control. Mm-hmm. And so, on one hand, we're twice as good at that. I guess, we could joke about that, but it's disturbing that, so many of us are at varying times in our careers diagnosable, not necessarily diagnosed as clinically depressed. And, the diagnosis isn't really that important. What's important is that most of those things are unintervened. And so there's very little that's being done to work with that other than cultural maladaptive behaviors, which is one of the reasons that we see such a poor mental health report card for men and women in law enforcement.
So what are the things, for someone who's trying to wrap their head around this whole idea, they've never heard of mindfulness before, or to them it's this woo-woo thing that's offered at yoga retreats, and they're not really familiar with it in the practical context of it, but they want to be more self-aware, they want to be more aware of their feelings and how it's interacting with themselves. I mean, we go off topic real quick, but earlier this year I don't know if you've heard it, but I've introduced this idea of badges. And it's our beliefs, actions, discipline, goals, emotions, and service. And my belief is that those 6 things, those 6 points of that star, all interrelate. And if we can focus on those 6 things, then that is where our awareness comes from, and that's how we become better. So in that context of our beliefs and our emotions, I think people are wanting to learn how to be more self-aware, but maybe don't know where to start. What are the first steps in something like that?
A really, really good question, Garrett. And I've been a student of stress and trauma, recovery, resilience of human performance for 15 years now. And what I have learned is that in order to cultivate self-awareness, we have to learn to sit with our own shit. And we have to learn how to pay attention to how we think, to our patterns of thinking, to the nature of our thinking. We have to learn to listen to this inner critic that we all have. And once we are attentive to those things, then we can begin to work with our thinking mind, and we can begin to transform this inner critic into an inner coach. And also, so the second arena that we work in is our feeling states. We also have to be attentive to understanding, one, just what emotions are from a scientific standpoint, and just real quick on that note, we all kind of think that emotions are some sort of optional thing, they make us weak. In reality, emotions are part of our human experience. And even I'll even go further. A lot of times we dismiss each other, men dismiss women frequently and say, well, you're just being emotional, as if emotion and rational thinking don't exist in the same space. And that's entirely non-scientific. Mm-hmm. And so how that impacts us culturally is that we feel like emotions are some sort of thing that we can control or not have. And the truth is, emotions will emerge in the middle of our operational lives, our administrative lives, and our other domains that we perform in. They'll emerge. They just will. And they'll emerge sometimes in the most inconvenient ways, in intensity and in how they're shaped, what kinds of emotions they are. And so what we need to learn is skills in just recognizing, anger is emerging. This is interesting. I'm talking with Garrett and, interesting that anger is emerging. Okay, I can work with anger. And then I just work with it because I've cultivated the skills to do that. What we often do is we fight with emotion that's emerging. So out in the field, you're on a radio call, maybe you're running code 3, lights and sirens, and you're going to a really interesting call, and you're feeling some fear. And so not only are you feeling fear, but now we socialize you to feel judgment because you're feeling fear. And now, so you're spending cognitive and physical energy in this judgment cycle and in this emotion cycle, and the emotion becomes so intense that you're not regulating it well. So now you have this dysfunctional emotion that's present with you in the radio car as you roll to this place. And so you don't have full cognitive agility when you arrive. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to train is emotions. Yeah, they're just part of the package, folks, and they make you actually badass. You need that fear. You need that anger. You need that emotion that's emerging so that you can perform better. Mm-hmm. And so that's another talk maybe too, but working with emotions is critically important. That is a component of self-awareness. And we learn to regulate them, not control them. Really, really important difference. Control implies you have a switch, you can turn them off. Absolutely not true. Regulation implies that you're aware of them and you can work with them. And the other area of self-awareness is just paying attention to the physical body. One of the exercises I do in training is I'll just have people sit there, and maybe it's a classroom environment, and I just have people sit there, close their eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and just feel their physical body. I did this just yesterday with a group of social workers, and the people reported, they're like, oh, I noticed this really serious tension in my shoulders and neck that I didn't really know was there. And someone else reports, yeah, I got this muscle in my back that's really tense and kind of hurts. And I had no idea that was going on. And we do this. We disassociate from our physical bodies. We become almost, as one of my favorite psychiatrists, Bessel van der Kolk, likes to say, we become disembodied with this vessel that we're in. This is our container, and you think we can really be connected to it, but we're not. And so self-awareness is about all those three arenas. Again, the thinking mind, the feeling states, and the physical body. And in 15 years of research, as a student, literally as a researcher, as a trainer, what we found is that mindfulness meditation is one of the most effective ways to train skills in self-awareness and in self-regulation. It is the fundamental baseline for all peak performance. And people may not have heard the term mindfulness, and I'm really tiring of the term, but really at the end of the day, it's attention training to all those arenas. And it's difficult attention training. I mean, it's not easy work. And it's also compassion training, because when you sit there and listen to your batshit crazy thoughts in your head, if you don't bring in some self-compassion, you're going to fall down the rabbit hole of self-judgment and self-criticism, and you're going to defeat yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is why awareness and compassion are skill sets that we train in this thing called mindfulness that literally, man, can become a superpower.
You mentioned compassion a couple times. Talk about that a little bit, and that self-compassion, because we are always told we need to be compassionate with the public or with other people, but what about ourselves?
Yeah. This is my favorite thing, and for the police leaders listening, one, thank you for the work you're doing, and two, compassion is a skill. It's not a directive. And so we put cops in a room, we put cops in a room and we tell them, be compassionate. And it's not a cognitive directive. It's a thing that we have to teach them how to do. Compassion is a skill. And what we know about compassion is that it erodes as a result of trauma. So what we're saying then is we have to practice this skill of compassion. And let me give you an operational definition of compassion. Compassion is fierce, it is kind, and it holds boundaries. I've just defined warrior compassion. Now, it's kind, it's not nice, right?
Yeah.
And it holds boundaries. And so that's an operational definition of compassion. And let me talk about compassion and empathy. Both are skills. And some would say, there's a lot of interesting research around compassion right now. And there's a lot of scientists that have really interesting ideas that are, of course, grounded in research. And they even differ in the communities out there. And that's all good. That's all really interesting for us. But practically, tactically, compassion for us, if we think of it as fierce, kind, and holds boundaries, and then we think of it as a skill. And so compassion and empathy are both skills. And what's important to understand is that compassion is this. Compassion is, Garrett, I see that you're suffering, and I'm here to do something about it. Empathy is, Garrett, dude, I see that you're suffering, and I'm feeling your suffering with you. It, in fact, can immobilize my ability to take action. So part of compassion holding boundaries is me holding boundaries so that I don't move into empathy when I see the suffering of the people I serve. Now, this is a gray space that we're in, right? It's not a clean cut. There are times, when I was a police officer, when I worked with certain populations, it was really difficult for me. For example, I remember my first, I guess we call it a SIDS death, where an infant died in the crib, and that was really hard not to be in a state of empathy. I was not able to hold those boundaries, right, with the parents, and that was rough. Other cases with children, it was really difficult, but you know what? It's one of those things that you can do it. You can be empathetic if you control it wisely, right? But for the most part, just probably like you, many of the radio calls that I was on, I held some boundaries. And I didn't step into the feeling states of that human suffering,
Mm-hmm.
because my job was to be there, was to be that compassionate warrior that was there to do something about it, right? And I think that's a really critical difference. We talk about these things of compassion and empathy, and we can train to both of those things. And what we know from a lot of research across populations is that mindfulness training improves our skills in compassion and empathy. And it keeps us from becoming burned out. So a lot of times there's a couple of things going on that are really interesting. We talk about burnout a lot in this profession, and for a long time, and I see it periodically. I don't see it too much anymore, but I see a lot of trainings around compassion fatigue. And I just want to say right now that compassion fatigue doesn't exist. It is a fallacy. It is not grounded in science. You cannot get fatigued from being compassionate. Now remember, compassion is fierce, kind, holds boundaries. And in practice, it looks like, hey, Garrett, I see that you're suffering and I'm here to help. Okay. What we're really talking about is what's known as empathic distress, which means in helping professions, when we are feeling too much into the suffering of others that we're helping and we get lost in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's important to understand the difference there, because one of the things culturally that I think we do to respond to empathic distress is shore ourselves up and become non-compassionate.
Okay.
When in reality, that's one of the worst things we can do for our own health and well-being, for the health and well-being of the people that we love, and for the people that we serve.
Yeah, it's interesting you say cognitive fatigue doesn't exist. I mean, I use that term, and I understand your point and how you go about it differently. But the experience of it was like, oh man, whatever label is on it, I've had it. I've been out there burned out, and I'm tapped out emotionally on giving a shit about whatever your problem is. And, it's, I say that ebbs and flows. And it was certainly there in a point, where it was more consistent. And it was one of those things where I was working on my self-awareness to be like, that's interesting. Why am I tapped out like that? But to some of the guys who, well, let me tell you this. Okay. So I got an email yesterday, and it was from a listener, a new listener, and it sums up, I think, what a lot of us are feeling, and how we struggle at times. He said he's got about a little over 2 decades with an urban department, and he's had some on-duty injuries. He had a surgery he had to do. And of course, after a lot of us after a surgery, you stop being as physically active, you get a little heavier. Stress was building, the tension was building with his family, and he knew he needed to make a change, but he was frustrated because, and this was where we connected. It was like he felt like he knew what he needed to do. He knew the facts of step 1, step 2, step 3. He knew what he needed to do to make the changes, but he just couldn't figure out how to implement the changes that he knew he had to make. And like I said, I could relate to that. So from a mindfulness perspective, and from the work you do, what do you suggest are those first steps towards making some of those changes? And I think I'm asking this question now because it comes to that idea of self-compassion. But can you answer that? What are the first steps someone who knows what they need to do but has a hard time just implementing? What do they do? What are steps 1?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. And it's a tough arena, right? Of this dissonance between what we know we want to do and actually what we do. And I think we all live in that space, Garrett. We all have things that we're like, oh man, I really want to do this. I really want to change my behavior in this way. And yet I just, for whatever reason, I can't get through that. I think there's a number of firsts to do, and there's some parallel tracks. And I would say, let's talk about 3 parallel tracks. The first one is go have a physical. Go see your medical doc, get a physical, get your metrics, check in with the doctor, see what intelligence is available about your physical body and your health and well-being. Because there may be some underlying things going on, right? That are obstacles that you're not aware of. The second thing is, yeah, we'll love this. Have that same check-in with your mental health clinician and ask your mental health clinician to hold you accountable. Set realistic goals with your clinician and ask them to hold you accountable, and then set an appointment to go see them 30, 60, 90 days later, whatever. right? And the third thing is baby steps, right?
Yeah.
And I would say within this arena of baby steps, this is the take care of yourself. This is, depending on what your behavioral change goals are, it's going to the gym, it's going to the pool, it's going to your faith practice, it's working on relationships, all of those things in conjunction with those other two things we talked about, your medical doc and your clinician. One of the components that would certainly be helpful, but it's not available to everybody, nor does everybody want to do it. And that's okay too, is really learning how to cultivate self-awareness through things like mindfulness or martial arts practice or some kind of mind-body intervention, yoga, tai chi, qigong, various kinds of interventions that get us connected back to our physical bodies. And what happens when we connect back to our physical bodies and our emotions and our thinking is there's almost an enlightenment that begins to happen. And it doesn't happen in a flash. It's not some sort of great transformational thing because you took a yoga class, but you begin to pay more attention. And you begin also to offer yourself some more compassion. And this idea of self-compassion is critically, critically important because, let's say I have a goal to stop eating chocolate or sugar, period, right? And chocolate is my kryptonite, right? And when I have sugar, then all of this negative narrative begins. This inner critic emerges. And not only did I just eat, I just drank a soda, but now my mind is creating this narrative that, yes, I drink the soda and I am an unworthy person, right? Mm-hmm. And all over, 32 ounces of Coke. Like, really? But this is what our minds do to us. And so to train the mind alongside this goal of training the body or the spirit or whatever it is we're trying to achieve is critically important. And I would submit that, your Badges toolkit is phenomenal. If we could combine some fundamental mindfulness training along with it, people could use tools like that with greater skill, with greater self-compassion, and really greater efficacy. Mm-hmm. But part of our problem is we put all these demands on ourselves about change, and realistically, it's really, really difficult to achieve change in the time frame that we give ourselves, right? Okay. Instead of, this is a long haul. We really need to step into this marathon of personal development and growth called a practice. Mm-hmm. But instead, our negative narratives emerge and paralyze us.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, fuck it. I'm going to just keep drinking sodas then, and the next thing you know, you weigh an extra 15 pounds and you have adult acquired diabetes, but your goal was to get rid of that shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's funny because even though I like to think that I'm aware of these things, and I think in the last year I've done a lot of work on identifying these things in myself. I even myself just yesterday found I started a new workout program, totally new thing. I'm trying to really nail down my morning routine. So for the last month, I've been up at 5 a.m. every day. I've had zero alcohol during that time. I'm trying to eat as clean as I can, and stepped on the scale and hadn't lost a pound, right, in 3 weeks, and was furious for a second that the scale hadn't budged, disregarding all the other evidence that my shirts were fitting tighter in the sleeves, that I was actually being able to close some of the jackets I couldn't wear before, that the evidence was there that I was building muscle, not just losing fat, right? But despite all of those other good metrics, I was focused on the one that told me I was failing. And I had to catch myself, right? And literally kind of mentally throw that scale away. It's so easy to get into that trap. And I've said it before too, we talk to ourselves in a way that we would never talk to another human being, right? We don't talk to our kids. When we want our kids to achieve something, I'm going to go coach my son's little league baseball game later today, right? And I'm not going to yell at them on the field the way that I hear it in my own head. But so why is it always okay that we endorse that language with ourselves, but we would never say those things through our mouth to somebody else? It's such a challenge. Well, it is such a challenge. And, you might offer yourself a gift and just throw away your scale at home and use some more at the gym. It's really good advice, I think, for folks. One of the Jason Saib, who's a trainer that I've worked with in the past, is just phenomenal. He's just like, why do you have a scale at home? Seriously, get rid of that. It's shit. It's not helpful, So there's that. Yeah. But
here's what we know about our thinking mind, and this is what's really important. So, you've just described this narrative that we all kind of have that's incredibly negative, this inner critic. And, we all kind of walk around because we don't talk about that. We don't normalize that. We all think, well, I'm the only motherfucker here that's thinking negatively about myself. Right. Mm-hmm. You go to the lineup and briefing and you're kind of having an off day and you're kind of feeling shitty and you have this negative narrative and you're like, I'm the only motherfucker here that is feeling this way. Right. Cause all these other brothers and sisters, I mean, they're ready to go. They're rock star warriors, but I'm the only one here that's feeling this way. And that's complete bullshit. The truth is we're all working with that inner narrative. And the thing is that it's not enough to be aware of it. So here we are having this conversation. Yeah, we have a negative inner critic. Cool. Okay, go on. Don't be negative. That will not work. Mm-hmm. What we have to do is retrain it. Mm-hmm. And the only way that I know and my team of researchers and trainers know how to retrain it with any kind of success is training meditation. It's the craziest thing, dude. I'm telling you, I absolutely believe this, and the evidence that we've researched with police officers supports it. And what we're doing is we're working with the thinking mind. We're listening to that negativity. We're offering some self-compassion, and we're ignoring it. Mm-hmm. Again and again and again. We keep coming back to the negative thinking. We listen to it. We ignore it. We focus our attention on something else. We begin to focus attention on positive things. We do this something called a compassion practice, or in other circles, it's known as a loving kindness practice, right?
Yeah. I've recommended that to people. Yeah.
And so we offer ourselves compassion. We say things like, may I be healthy? May I experience joy? Mm-hmm. Right. And I add some other fun things too, like may I be resilient and have clarity. And there's all kinds of things to do, but we begin to do that. And it literally begins to disrupt the neurological activity in our brain that is negative. And it rewires, it transforms the neural pathways of negativity mm-hmm. towards those that hold compassion and realistic positivity. Mm-hmm. And that's how we do it.
That practice of loving kindness was something I started, I think in 2017, and I've gotten away from it recently. So when you just said that right there, it sparked it in me. But I think that was really the impetus to me developing a lot of the skills that have helped me turn the corner on a lot of things. And I don't know about yours, but I mean, I got it from Pema Chodron and reading her, but for people who are listening, it sounds weird, but it's a very wonderful practice, and you feel it takes 30 seconds and you feel really good at the end of it. This is what I do, but you first wish for yourself to be happy and find happiness. And you're doing this while you kind of take some deep breaths. And then you think of somebody close to you, somebody within your immediate family, maybe your wife or your spouse or your son or daughter or mother or father. And you wish for them to find happiness as well. And then you think about someone who's one more step out from you, maybe a coworker or somebody you work with, somebody, a friend of yours. And you think about this and you say their name through it. And you say, I wish that so-and-so finds happiness and health. And then you move another step forward to somebody you may not like or may not know. And the one you may not like is an interesting challenge. It might be that captain that's just up your ass all the time, or it could be someone on your squad who's slacking. But you say their name and you think and you say it to yourself, I wish them happiness and health. And then you move to someone you don't know, someone who could just be an example, the beggar on the corner, or someone you've heard about on the news, and wish them health and happiness too. And it expands this idea out beyond you, but it is incredibly calming too. And I think you feel good because you've now thought good thoughts for other people, but you've included yourself in those thoughts. That's been my experience with that.
Yeah, you nailed it. And there's a lot of ways to vary that practice and make it longer, make it shorter, offer different affirmations and different things. But that's absolutely right. And, it's a powerful practice. And, here's the thing that we're striving for. There's this concept called equanimity. Mm-hmm. And I remember going through my training at UCLA to become a certified mindfulness trainer. I was the only cop in the room, of course, surrounded by a bunch of really amazing people, social justice advocates and mental health clinicians of varying degrees. And they all were throwing around this term equanimity. And I was just like, kind of like the dumb cop in the room, like, well, okay, what does that mean? And they look at me like, well, how dare you not know what that means? And then, of course, they coached me up. And over time, I really explored this notion of equanimity. And, I've heard it described by contemplative teachers as an unshakable balance of mind. Or I've also heard it described as neither indifferent or apathetic, but just grounded, centered as we enter into the world. And, I think that this notion of equanimity is one that is critically important. And I think it is the end state for me. It is the end state of peak performance or flow states in the Warriors community. And so to be able to move into the world, still experience all the things we experience, still take in all the data, and to have this clarity of mind and this discernment and the ability to respond to the world around us rather than react because of our own dysregulated shit is really what equanimity is all about. And it's offering people the grace of humanity. And it's a philosophical and even practical extension of this idea of diversity and inclusion, which is almost more of a political idea than it is in a practice. And if we cultivate this notion of equanimity, that we can move into spaces regardless of the color of our skin, our gender identification, where we come from, our education, our language, all these things, and just move into spaces and see people with compassion, but yet see them for who they are, not with our own bullshit getting in the way, but really see people for who they are, respond with this fierce, kind, and boundary-holding compassion. That really is kind of what we're striving for. And we train towards equanimity when we work with the thinking mind, our feeling states, our emotions, and our physical body, and we synchronize those things to be able to have greater capacity to move into flow states in all of the domains in which we perform. Yes, tactically, operationally at work, that's critically important, but also when you order your Starbucks, and your encounter, however superficial yet deeply authentic, with that barista, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's an opportunity for performance of a small connection on a human level. Instead of being on my phone, instead of not looking them in the eye, instead of disregarding them as a human being, which we frequently do as a society, it's a short, brief encounter. Maybe say their name. They're wearing a damn name tag, be human, smile, have some offer of some kindness to this person, in large part because they're a person, right? And not to get bent out of shape because you got too much caramel in your macchiato, whatever the hell you're drinking, right? But, be grateful that, I have this warm beverage that has caffeine. That was my end game. And then maybe not have so much sugar in it, right? But yeah, so I think equanimity is this idea that I really would like to start seeing more and more conversations and training towards in the law enforcement circles, because man, I think it so aligns and resonates with our warrior culture.
Wow, that's interesting, and we could talk a long time just about that, and I can already see where that goes. Not to keep, so I don't want to keep you all day. I mean, I do, but I know I can't. You've been doing a lot of new research too since the last time we talked, and you've gotten some real buy-in, from a big department, 2 big departments. But catch us up on the stuff you're working on now, because and I'll pause too. You just recently retired. Congratulations from full-time law enforcement, and have moved into doing your mindful badge work full time now. So this is your it's been really fun to watch too. Side hustle is such a diminishing term for something like this, but your side hustle, your passion project, I like that better. Your passion project moving into something that now has the demand to warrant the ability for you to do this full time. So tell us about what you've been doing.
Yeah, so the side hustle has game now, and for sure, I don't mind that term at all, because it for years it was absolutely a side hustle, and I just had to pull the pin from the full-time day job in order to do this work. So I do a number of things, and one of the things I do is I sit on faculty at Pacific University up here in Forest Grove, Oregon, at the Graduate School of Psychology, which really we are the epicenter of the research and training in mindfulness and policing in North America, and we did the first research, and have done the most research. And in the world of academia, it's important for me to say that, because I have to give some shout out to my team there. We just Well, in 2017, we wrapped up a 3-year study where we trained about 58 police officers in 8 weeks of mindfulness-based resilience training. And we got some really good data. So let me talk about the data there. So that data showed that we were able to reduce cortisol levels in police officers with simply 8 weeks of training. That is phenomenal. Cortisol, the stress neurochemical, is responsible for inflammation in the body and driving epigenetics of disease and all kinds of problems, right? So we also were able to reduce anger and aggression. These are self-reported, valid scientific tests. We were able to improve sleep, improve pain management, reduce alcohol abuse, and some other measures. And so, if I walked up to police leaders and community leaders and said, hey, we have 8 weeks of training where we can reduce cortisol levels, anger and aggression, improve sleep, actually, the one I missed was compassion and empathy. What do you think, y'all? And really, we can say that now. We have valid research, randomized control trial, all the, rigorous research methods. And so that's what's beginning to get the attention of police and now community leaders. It's no longer police leaders. So we wrapped that project up. We're still publishing some papers in various, academic arenas around that. And we just started in November. We started a 5-year study funded by the National Institutes of Health that's looking at the feasibility and the efficacy of mindfulness training in law enforcement at 2 agencies. Those agencies are Albuquerque, New Mexico Police Department and Portland Police Bureau in Oregon. And interestingly enough, both agencies are under federal consent decree. And so I think the training aligns nicely into some of the things that they're doing as a result of that. And so we begin training this fall. We're doing a whole lot of administrative things, setting things up and recruiting and intake and all of that right now. So we're hopeful to see some results. And one of the things that we're looking at, and this makes some of us cops uncomfortable sometimes, but we're looking at the feasibility of mindfulness training to reduce police violence. So let me talk about that. So the state of California right now is looking at this issue. The legislature in California is looking at this issue. They're introducing legislation around changing how we use force. And, so there's a whole lot of pressure on how do we reduce police violence. And what I would submit is this. I really do believe that training in mindfulness, in conjunction with other whole person health training, let's get physically fit and, let's train well in our tactical acumen. I do believe that we will be able to impact the human performance in the, rapidly evolving, dynamic, often violent situations that officers are confronted in. I also think we're going to see less force used. And when it's used, it'll be on track. It'll be more effective. And so we're minimizing the unnecessary force and we're making more skilled the necessary force. And this is our approach to training mindfulness, to look at this idea of police violence.
Makes sense. And we talked about this actually on our last conversation together about how, I think I described, if I remember correctly, it was a car stop and just being aware of that heightened stress, the increasing heart rate and the shortened breath and those sorts of things, and how being able to just recognize those things, identify them, and then calm them through just the simple tools on my tool belt of breathing and awareness and giving some space. How those things can reduce those kinds of threats or those kinds of assaults from happening, or that police violence from happening when it's still reasonable but not necessary. And I think that seems to be in California here, where we're living in this gap between, or we're struggling with this gap and this idea between what is reasonable, and that's what we've always gone by, and that's what our benchmark has always been. I mean, since, reasonably anyway. And now what they're pushing is necessary. And that's a wide chasm to cover from a legal standpoint, but within ourselves, I think anybody can think about the difference between the opportunity to and the difference between using reasonable force and what is necessary, and how, if we have other tools in our toolbox for this, how we might be able to eliminate some of that. I think it makes sense. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think that's terribly controversial, other than that's the same word, necessary, that the California state legislature is using.
Sure. And to talk about the practical implications here of training, we talked about obstacles early on in our conversation. And one of the obstacles is that mindfulness training cannot be delivered with any kind of efficacy when we train it like we do a lot of other things. So in other words, it's not just a 4-hour class on mindfulness is going to change your life. It's not something you wrap up in Molly gear and attach to your vest. It's something that you embody. It's a set of skills that you learn how to integrate into the rhythms of your life. And so you always have them with you. It's not stopping on duty and meditating. It's not pausing. There's no pausing involved here. It's integrating these skills of awareness and compassion and regulation of your thinking, your feeling, and your physical body, so that you are more effective, you're more capable of taking data in, making sense of that data, and making informed decisions. And so the problem is that now we're struggling with the institution and the paradigms of how we train. And we'll just come in and do a 2-hour talk. And I don't generally don't do that because it's not helpful. Yeah. I need at least one full day with you to get you over your own shit based on the trauma you've experienced, the shit based on what culture tells you around mindfulness, just to get to a place where you can trust me, that we can do some things experientially that begin to make sense to you. But realistically, we need to sustain this kind of training over a long period of time. And that requires funding. Mm-hmm. And so the one obstacle to all of this around mindfulness is just funding. It doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Most agencies don't have much of a training budget to speak of. And when you start talking about, this is more than a 2-hour class or a 4-hour class, then I don't know how we afford that. So I think one of the things that's going to be really critically important in the short run is to find funding through private foundations and other places that are willing to fund agencies to train. Mm-hmm. And eventually the federal dollars will start to align and they'll start to fund these kinds of models of training. But, right now you may have a chief that really wants to train their folks, but they have no funding to do it.
Yeah. I attended a class just 2 weeks ago now. That was a lot of these kinds of topics. It wasn't specifically about mindfulness, but it was more about officer wellness and kind of the general big umbrella things that we need to do to be better. And it was valuable information, especially for people in the room who never had approached this stuff or gone after it. But as someone who's been digging into it for the last 3.5 years, was frustrated by the inability by a class and the style of just a class to be 8 hours long, despite how much good information was in that class. That class was now over. It was the end. They weren't coming back, right? It wasn't, and there was go forth into the world with what you've learned. And this is not the fault of the instructors or the curriculum or anything like that. It's just like you said, it's the way that we teach things as an industry. You go to an 8-hour class, you get post-certified in that, and now all of a sudden you're blessed as an expert, whatever. The follow-through on those things for a lot of people, that's where the ball gets dropped, it seems.
Yeah, so I want to talk about follow-through. So one of the things that now that I have a different day job and I have some more room to do some things that I've been wanting to do for a long time, one of the things I'm going to do that will be a resource for your listeners is on an app called Insight Timer. So that's Insight Timer. I have there's a group on there called Mindful Badge Initiative. And I am going to record a number of guided meditation practices in a variety of different, I guess we'll say genres. And those will be available for people to access for free.
Oh, that's awesome.
And what I want to do is I want to create a tribe. So you can, you create, like any app, you create your account and you can join this Mindful Badge group. And then, you can use a fake name if you want to, if that makes you comfortable, but you can actually create some social connectivity there, because only people who join the group they're vetted by me on some very weak level. So let me be clear about that. So it's a closed group, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And really it's an opportunity to say, oh, hey, Garrett's meditating, or you can send me a message, or I can say, hey, dude, I haven't seen you here for 3 days or 5 days or 10 days or, 2 months. How's it going or whatever? But there'll be some guided meditations that my goal is to create some things, and I'm working on this. It's going to take me probably another 3 or 4 weeks to really finalize the practices that I'll upload, and then I'll add things ongoing, and I'll add them for different communities, and by communities I mean within the first responder community. But I want to have that as a resource for folks. I've so at the end of the conversation, at the end of the training, people have some place to go. Okay, I want to try this meditation thing out. I want to go see what this is like, and so that will be a resource for folks if they want to go check that out. Maybe connect with me there. And then just know that it's going to give me, I need a few weeks in order to upload some things, but that's coming. So that's going to be one free resource. There's plenty of other resources out there that you can pay for, for guided practices, none of which are culturally competent, but that's okay too. You can explore and kind of see what's out there. But if you're looking for a specific, kind of more gritty, trained by, retired cop, then this is a good place to go.
That's the same timer I use, and as we were talking, I was like, oh, that's cool, and I opened it up and searched, and I'm following you now.
Right on. So, excellent.
And when that goes live, let us know, because we'll make sure that the followers know. That's a great timer to use if you're just trying to get a handle on doing some meditation and wanting to try it out, and you're not sure you want to spend the money on Headspace or whatever yet, or whatever. But I use it and have had success with it, so I'm looking forward to that. Other than the Insight Timer, Richard, where else can people find you and find out more information about you and follow the work you're doing?
Yes, so primarily right now it's on my website, and that's mindfulbadge.com. I do have an Instagram and Twitter account, but I am kind of hibernating on social media. I'm trying to sort out what does that look like. To be honest with you, I get really frustrated with people in this training community who take pictures with everyone they train with and post them on the website and then tell stories. And I find that incredibly annoying. And two, if you and I train together, who the hell am I to put your picture on there and say, hey, this is what Garrett's doing. Garrett's really struggling, and here's his, it's like, fuck you. Don't do shit like that. So I'm pretty quiet on social media in large part because I'm not convinced it has a whole lot of value. And I know already people are probably pissed off that I said that, and that's okay. But my website is always up and active, and that's really the primary source of connecting. And you can get to me via email there, but my email address is very simple. It's just richard@mindfulbadge.com. We've got trainings upcoming. We're doing a training at the end of next month up here in Oregon. It's a 3-day residential retreat. Those are really fantastic. We're doing another one up in Vancouver Island in June. I think in Tempe, Arizona, sometime in April or May. We're still working out those details. So, the West Coast is going to get a number of these retreats. And, I did throw my hat in the ring for some grant funding through California Post. I'm an amateur when it comes to that stuff, or the bureaucracy of grants, but, maybe I'll get some funding and we'll do some really cool training that'll be free in the state of California. But we'll see.
Oh, great. And we'll include show notes or links in the show notes for this episode for your email address and your website in case people are driving around unable to write that stuff down. They can go to the squadroom.net and get that information there, and then reach out and contact Richard there. This is such a I'm worried that people are going to, because this is such a trendy word over the last year. I mean, I was in the grocery store last night, and there was a magazine called Mindful right next to People magazine, and I'm worried that people are going to see that this is a quote-unquote buzzword these days, and that it's a thing, and that they're not going to look deep into how effective this stuff is. As someone who is practicing this but is not a practitioner, who struggles with a daily practice of it, but also tries to implement these things, and often unsuccessfully, but at least trying, my own life has drastically changed as a result of developing some of that self-awareness, some of that self-compassion. And it's made me a better cop, and it's definitely made me a better supervisor and a better leader. So I hope that people really, really look into this, look into the work you're doing, and see how they can implement some of these things in their lives. So thanks, Richard, for being with us today. Fantastic conversation. I would love to keep you all day for this, but I know you've got to run. So thanks for being with us.
Hey, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here, Garrett, and thanks for listening, folks. All
right, thanks for listening to this episode of The Squad Room. If you like what you heard today and got something out of the episode, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice, and more importantly, share the episode with somebody you know. Richard's got a lot of great information on his website. He got a lot of great information here today, and I got to tell you, dealing with the self-awareness and the mindfulness stuff has been the number one game changer in my own path. I'm walking this path with each and every one of you. And I'm for some of you, maybe I'm a couple steps ahead, right? I'm a couple meters ahead of you on some things, but there's plenty of you out here. There's plenty of you out there who are farther ahead than me on some things, and it's an ebb and flow. But the one thing I've found that has absolutely been crucial is developing that self-awareness practice and that mindfulness practice. Check him out at Mindful Badge, and of course, you can follow me on socials at the Squad Room, and join our Facebook group, and we'll talk some more about this and these ideas of mindfulness there in our Facebook group. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, always, you can reach me, Garrett, 2Rs2Ts at thesquadroom.net. That's my email. I respond to email and enjoy the conversations and the comments I get from there too. And just want to thank everybody for listening. This is now, we're into our triple-digit episodes, and conversations like this are always what keeps me going. Getting up and knowing that I'm going to have an interesting conversation with someone, and then I'm going to be able to share some interesting information with all of you. And especially when I hear from people that something hits home and that something has helped them make a change for the better, that's just fantastic. So I appreciate all of you for listening. Appreciate everybody who's out there on the watch right now listening to this in their squad cars, pushing a black and white or whatever color your agency is. But those of you who have the watch, I've been off patrol now for a couple of months, and I miss it terribly. I never expected those words to come out of my mouth when I left patrol. And it's when I left patrol that it was shortly before I left patrol where I was struggling with some of the things that Richard talks about here, some of this burnout and some of those things, and just needed a change for a while. But it really wasn't a change of scenery in my assignment that I needed. It was a change in mindset. That's all it was. But I still am still attached to the patrol side. But to me, when I hear someone who's listening to these episodes in their car and it's night shift and it's 3 a.m, it's freezing cold outside, and they're driving around keeping everybody in check, it means the world to me that you guys are spending your time with me. All right? Until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.